In the beginning, in Jake Paul's book of boxing Genesis, I was just like everybody else. I would tune into these fights because I hated this kid's attitude. I hated his demeanor and I wanted to see him get smoked. The first person that I believed that could do so was Nate Robinson. And let me tell you, no one in the world was more shocked than I was to see that this was the end result of Nate Robinson versus Jake Paul. He got absolutely smoked, but surely this was a one-off. Surely this was just some sort of fluke. It was an exhibition after all. Now, as if I didn't dislike this kid enough, insert one Ben Askren. He's a god amongst wrestlers, a god in the MMA community, especially over in Asia. And I think we all just felt that even though Ben wasn't a striker, that he possessed at least enough combat experience to get the job done. Nothing could have prepared me for this. Not only did Jake beat Ben Askren, but he destroyed him. And he made it look easy, so a lot of us began to ask the question, are Jake Paul's fights fixed? Fight a real striker, and it doesn't even matter if this real striker from the MMA world is over the hill. A pure striker will be enough to put Jake Paul away. Insert Tyron Woodley. We all remember this. We remember this moment, and ultimately Tyron Woodley lost this fight, but I know that I believe, maybe you did, that if he could get a second chance at it, he would be able to finish Jake Paul. Yeah, well, we all saw how that went. Sadly, it was this fight, more than any of the others, that really had me bought in on the idea that Jake's fights were absolutely fixed. Tyron drops the hand at the right moment, and then Jake clips him and puts him out. And as if that wasn't bad enough, Tyron Woodley had to get Jake Paul's name tatted on him or something like that. You guys remember this, right? But it was after this fight that Jake Paul probably had the biggest fight of his career up to date, and nobody believed that Jake was going to win this one. Anderson Silva versus Jake Paul has got to be one of Jake's best fights up to date. It was a huge jump up and a huge challenge for himself. Anderson Silva had already showed that he could perform in the boxing ring. And this was a really good fight. The fight went back and forth. Anderson Silva landed a lot of good shots on Jake, but that's when he showed me something that I had never seen from Jake before. And that was Jake's ability to be able to make changes, make adjustments mid-fight, and be able to come on stronger in the later rounds to secure victory. This was the first time ever that I believed that maybe perhaps Jake Paul was kind of good, but maybe it was just that he was fighting older guys and he hadn't fought a real boxer yet. Insert one, Tommy Fury. Now, Tommy Fury is no Tyson Fury. We all know this, but he was the only true boxer that Jake had fought up until this point, and we started to see some of the cracks in Jake's game. But still, this was a very close fight. Each guy both had their moments, and Jake Paul at one point even scored a knockdown over Tommy Fury. It was the only knockdown of the fight, and I believe that Jake had done enough to win. His first loss, his only loss. It was at this point that the majority of us believed that Jake had been exposed. To this date, it's a rematch that I'd really like to see, but I believe that Jake Paul has kind of flown by Tommy Fury, so we may never see it again. After this fight, Jake continued to fight older guys, washed up UFC guys. Nate Diaz was next. That was a silly fight. Nobody liked it, and it felt like Jake had a blueprint. And if he didn't stick to that blueprint of fighting these older UFC guys, then he was going to lose. And as bad as that Ryan Borland and Andre August fight was, maybe it was smart. Maybe this was all part of Jake Paul's plan to climb back up slowly after that loss to Tommy Fury. Because after that, we all know what happened. Iron Mike Tyson making a comeback at the prime age of 58 live on Netflix. At this time, this was the biggest fight that had ever taken place in the entire world. I mean, for God's sakes, it was on Netflix. But I think most of the world and their opinions about this fight were split. Why did Jake Paul want to fight such an old man in Mike Tyson? A win over an old Mike, you can't even properly put him on your resume. But there was one thing I noticed in that fight, and that was Jake Paul's respect for the sport of boxing. I could finally truly appreciate it and see it for what it really was. There were many times in that fight where he could have put Tyson away if he truly wanted to, but he didn't. And all of this leads to right now, where Jake Paul started his career fighting a 5'9" Nate Robinson, to where now this Friday, tomorrow, live on Netflix, he is going to be taking on the former heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua, who is still in his prime, might I add. Jake Paul has made boxing watchable again for the casual viewers like myself. He has made it fun. I don't believe that there's been anyone within the last decade that has done as much for boxing as Jake Paul has. And it is for no other reason than we all wanted to show up, pay the price, or stream the fights to see him get beat. But on every single fight card, at every single press conference, we saw most valuable promotions building. We saw what he was doing for fighters like Amanda Serrano, what he was doing for female boxing. And we've seen his roster on MVP expand. The fact that he is giving people chances, marketing opportunities, big paydays, and finally making boxing relevant again to the average viewer is the reason why I say Jake Paul has saved boxing. And I really don't care if you don't agree. Look, the wall's over there. You can go argue with it. I go back to 2017 when Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather. That is when the MMA world and boxing world collided for the first time, really, especially on that level. In a sense, I believe that Conor does have responsibility for starting this whole thing in a way, but Jake Paul has taken this thing to the next level. I've also got to give a shout out to guys like Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia for taking these big fights, making these big fights happen, because for so long, boxers were just going undefeated 30-0 and selling off into the sunset without ever unifying the titles, without ever taking the hard fights. And that's just something fans of the UFC are not used to. Every Saturday, there's a new storyline. There's a new championship fight happening. That's the reason why UFC is winning. But in this new climate of boxing, with guys like Jake Paul, with guys like Turki Al-Sheikh, with Saudi Arabia, and with most valuable promotions, the future for boxing is more promising than it's ever been. As Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano get older, we now have women like Alicia Baumgardner who are coming up, who's probably going to have an awesome performance tomorrow and is probably going to have a giant mega year in 2026. Make no mistake, my feelings on Jake Paul are not neutral. I think he has been a net positive for the sport of boxing as well as combat sports alike. I'm curious to see what you guys think about this, what your guys' thought is on Jake Paul being in combat sports. If I had to give a prediction on how the fight will go tomorrow, I believe that Anthony's going to get it done within the first 3 rounds. If Jake somehow finds a way and gets to the second half of that fight, I think we've got to be talking about Jake Paul as maybe one of the better cruiserweights in the world, because I don't know a ton of cruiserweights that can hang in there with Anthony Joshua in 5 rounds or more. For so long, the narrative about Jake Paul was that he was afraid to take risks, that he would only fight guys who were over the hill and guys that weren't even really boxers anyway. After tomorrow, all of that gets put to bed. Not only is he fighting a guy in his prime, he's fighting Anthony Joshua. The guy towers over him at least 5 inches. This is going to be an awesome night of fights, and I will be rooting for Jake Paul. Let me know your thoughts on all this down in the comments. I'll holler at you all very soon. Peace.